All right, that's recording. All right, so hi everyone. Just make sure that you mute your microphones. If you do want to ask a question, then just unmute and you can ask a question or just type it into the chat pod. And I've got the chat open in the second screen, and I can see who's participating on the second screen as well. So just keep it muted while we're going. What I'll do is I'll pause for questions as we go through, and then you can ask questions as I pause for those questions. So basically, the agenda for tonight is that we're going to just do some very quick feedback on assessment item number 2. I'm just going to talk about just getting ready for assessment item 4. We will talk about assessment item 4 in subsequent online meetings. And I'm just going to introduce you to the basics of referencing. We'll talk about Turnitin briefly. We'll just learn about this, do a little bit of a demo, and we'll just show you some examples of what Turnitin looks like and what to look for and how to work through it. So let's just go back. So just tell me if you can, just give me a thumbs up if you can see the home page for the Interact site. Okay, thanks. All right, so I'm just going to change what I'm sharing. All right, so give me a thumbs up if you can see assessment item 2 feedback. Okay, all right, thanks. All right, so I think the first thing that I want to say is that it looks like most students are learning how to get around the sites and learning what to look for, what to read. But I do need to emphasize to other students that one of the most important documents on our site is the presentation essay document, and you'll find that in all of the essay assignments folders. You'll also find it in the academic skills toots tab or folder, and I've also put it into the resources folder. So, and the other place that you will find it is that, because I refer to it quite often in the online meetings, is that I always put a copy of it in the online meeting table. So it's important to have a look at that document. So, I mean, I'm just going to go through it very quickly, just to remind you, the presentation essay document. We will be writing essay documents from now on, with the exception of assessment item 4, which is an annotated bibliography, but which is a build-up to preparing for an essay assignment. Is that, you know, you've got to just make sure that you look at the structure, just make sure that you address your language. It's got to be, this is professional skills in Ag and Hort, and that means professional writing. So we've got to get rid of all the colloquialisms. We've got to get rid of all the slang. We've got to start learning to write professionally. And so that's extremely important. So have a look at this document and have a look at structure, language. Don't worry about visuals at this stage. We'll talk about visuals a little bit later on. And visuals are only really required once we get to assessment item number 6. And we'll address that when we get nearer that time. So don't forget that you need to put a cover page on top of your assignment. And I have given you an exemplar. So this is an exemplar of a cover page. It's got to have all the information: subject code, subject name, assessment item number, assessment item name. If it's a question, you put the question. If it's a title that you have to create for yourself, then you create that title and pop that on. Put a visual on. Make sure you acknowledge where you get that visual from, and then make sure you put your name and student number. I had quite a few students submit their assignments just with the student number. you need to put your student name on as well. I think that kind of comes from having studied at other universities where they only give the student number. All right, so I am going to go into a little bit more detail about this shortly, just a bit of revision. So don't forget what goes into an introduction. I've provided an explanation of what goes into an introduction there. Don't forget that the body is made up of paragraphs, and each paragraph needs to follow the PEAL format. I'll talk about that again shortly. And then the third part of an essay is the discussion and conclusion. And there's a breakdown of what goes into a discussion and conclusion. So if you're not quite sure, just keep going back to this document, read it. You can always come back to the online meetings where I show examples or exemplars of what to do, and I'll certainly do that tonight. Referencing from now on is important. Okay, so we didn't have to do referencing for assessment item number 2. Just going to mute. We didn't have to do a referencing for assessment item number 2, but we do have to do referencing for all the subsequent assignments. So let's carry on here. Right. So the overall structure is that introduction, the body, discussion, and conclusion. Headings are not necessary at this stage. Maybe when we get to assessment item number 6, we might think about putting headings in. And because assessment item 2 was such a small item, it was just a one-pager, and there are lots of components that go into an introduction and into a discussion and conclusion. The volume would have been about 25 for introduction, body, discussion, and conclusion, whereas now we're going to be writing longer essays, and that will come down to about 10, 80, 10. So 10 to 15%, 70 to 80%, 10 to 15% is what you need to aim for. Now, in most cases, we hit those targets for the introduction and the body. But for the discussion and conclusion, it just looked like many students got a little bit tired and didn't put as much effort into the discussion and conclusion as would be required. So don't get tired, just keep going and get to the finish. We're all watching Commonwealth Games at the moment. All right, so, and of course, as I said, don't forget that cover page. All right, so let's just go back to our presentation. So these are the components, just to remind you, those are summarized there. They are explained in a bit more detail in the presentation essay document, but for an introduction, use tab card. And what I do need to point out is that in many instances, students tended to neglect the direction and the objectives. And really, those are the two of the key components of an introduction. And I'll show you some exemplars shortly. So most of you got the topic, the title, you attracted our attention, provided some background, created some kind of credibility, either by talking about your own experiences or using references. But in many cases, objectives and direction was left out or weren't quite clear enough, and you will have received that feedback, and I'll talk about feedback shortly. So the next thing is that the body is made up of paragraphs, and now that we're getting into longer assignments, assessment 5 and 6, you will have many paragraphs in the assignment and the essay, and so now we want you to use the PEAL format. In most instances, most students made their point, provided the evidence, but in many instances didn't bother to analyze or interpret or discuss the evidence against the point, and that's really very important. And in many cases, students didn't lead into the next paragraph. Now, in the last assignment, we asked you to provide an argument and a counter argument. So leading into the counter argument would have been as simple as, on the other hand, but this is not always the case, and then that would lead into the next So very important that you follow the PEAL format for assessment items number 5 and number 6. The other thing that I do need to point out is that in many instances, sentence structure is not great, as is the use of punctuation. So very important that you work on sentence structure. And those of you who need work on sentence structure, I will have made comments in the feedback, and I would have suggested that you contact the academic skills team to get some help. All right. Then the last part of the essay is the discussion and conclusion. And I've made up an acronym, which I've called SEQUENCE. And the first thing to do is to summarize the main findings. The next thing is to refer back to the introduction. What did you set out to do? Did you ask questions? Have you answered the questions? So in other words, go back to what was your direction and what was your objective? And that's where, in the discussion and conclusion, you address that in the discussion and conclusion. All right. I see people are joining us. Just make sure you mute, guys. The next thing in a discussion conclusion is that you evaluate your findings. This is now where you add your own opinions, your own interpretation. Now, in the last assignment, assessment item number 2, you could say, I think this, and according to my opinion, all right? And that's using what we call the first person. From now on, we can't use the first person. We've got to use the third person, or we've got to use passive voice. And I'll talk about that briefly shortly, but we will cover that in a whole lot more detail in subsequent online meetings. And the last part is the next step. So what does this all mean? You just make some concluding statements, and I'll show you some examples. So, all right, so I'm just going to show you and perhaps read to you some examples of a good introduction, a good paragraph, and a good discussion and conclusion. So let's just have a look at that. So here's a good introduction, and it covers all the components of TABCOT. And you can see what I've done is I've highlighted where those components are met. And what you will find is that in some cases, you write a single sentence, and you might satisfy 3 components of the TABCOT requirement. So in this example here, Australia's agrarian history has imprinted itself on the very fabric of Australian culture. Whether this be the romanticized stockman from Banjo Patterson's poems or the corrupting influence of John MacArthur in the New South Wales colony, Australians have a profound connection to agriculture and to farmers. So this particular student has drawn our attention, talking about Banjo Patterson, John MacArthur, and the New South Wales colony, and use some interesting language and some references. And at the same time, it's also provided a little bit of background, basically how important the farmer is, or the image of the farmer is to Australian culture. And the credibility comes from the fact that the student has actually used some references to Banjo Patterson and John MacArthur, and some historical references. So in that one particular sentence, this particular student has actually managed to satisfy 3 of those components. So popular culture has captured the essence of an Australian farmer: slow-talking, weather-beaten face under a dirty Akubra hat, hardworking and dedicated, community-minded, and set in their ways from generations on the land. So the typical farmer, that's our topic, that's been mentioned there. And then there's a little bit of background as to what is a typical farmer. This impacts the social capital in farming communities by alienating the majority of Australians who live in capital cities. So this is now saying, well, this is where I'm going. My essay is going to be how the image of the farmer has influenced social capital by alienating the majority of Australians, because farmers are not the majority of Australians. And it is this perception that causes friction in the social capital and hinders its development. So the objective is to show that this image of the farmer is actually hindering the development of social capital in farming communities. That's a very good introduction. It is quite intellectual. I didn't expect most of you to be quite that intellectual, but this is a pretty good introduction. You can always just compare yours against what this one was all about. So the next thing is good paragraph structure and content using the PEAL format. This particular student, what I just need to point out here is that these exemplars don't come from one student or from one assignment. I've actually picked them from different students' assignments. I see I've made a spelling mistake there, examples. It is clear that city people have an unfortunate view of farmers. So that's made the point, okay? The media often portrays farmers as old, haggard, down-and-out men in their late 50s. Often the popular media make jokes of this image of the farmer who is not taken seriously enough. So that's providing some evidence or examples. To improve social capital in rural farming regions, the National Farmers Federation could begin an advertising campaign which portrays farmers in a better light as educated, technologically advanced members of both genders, which in turn will attract younger people into agriculture and improve the farming community social capital. So this is now doing some analysis and interpretation of the example and how it actually meets the point. And then finishing off the paragraph, and you can see this is a very short paragraph. It's, you don't have to write screeds and screeds to meet those PEAL components of a good paragraph. And the last part then says, however, there are other opinions about this view. So the next paragraph then, this particular student then gave an alternative view or an alternative argument. Right, so that's a good introduction. That's a good paragraph, which would have been part of this essay. And then here, this one now is a discussion and conclusion. I don't know why my computer is so slow. So in this case here, this discussion has actually said it's clear that city folk have one perception of the Australian farmer, which seems biased. On the other hand, the farming community has a more positive vision of farmers as determined by the research on perceptions. So that's summarizing the main facts from this student's assignment. Now we're going to analyze and discuss it all. Both media and farmers' organizations need to play a role to encourage the positive perceptions and educate city folk about where and how their food is produced. That way, city folk will better understand where and how their food is produced, repeating himself a little bit, but more importantly, by whom, not just old, uneducated, hardworking men. So that's analysis, discussion of the discussion and conclusion. This may result in improved social capital in farming regions, where younger people will be encouraged to take up agricultural careers and businesses established to serve those regions, thereby creating better social capital. So that's now a concluding statement. So those are just some exemplars, and I'll put them up in the table and you can have a good look at them and just make some comparisons of your own against your own assignments. All right. I'll pause shortly for questions. I'll just finish off. I think I've got 2 more slides. All right. So what is important is that I'm giving you some feedback, but you will have received feedback in your assignments. Now, quite often, students have turned around to me and said, well, I didn't get any feedback. Where do I find my feedback? Well, where you find your feedback is in Easts. Okay, what you've got to do, you've got to go back into Easts. You've got to download the marked assignments, open up that marked assignment, and then you'll find some feedback. So download it. What you'll find is that there's a marking rubric. It's color-coded with grades and marks. There'll be some general comments underneath the rubric, and then there'll be comments and corrections all the way through the assignment. All right. So what does that actually look like? So this is an actual example of a student's assignment where I have marked it and where I've made comments, etc. So just to show you. So You can see here, this is not an ideal cover page. And what I have done is I've actually made a comment. I've said it's a good cover page, but you could improve it. And I've made some suggestions how to improve the cover page. Why my computer suddenly got slow. Okay. So here now, what you'll find is that you can see in the text, I've made some corrections, and I've also made some comments on the side about the introduction, about the paragraph. And in this, I mean, in this particular case here, this student started a paragraph talking about social capital. The definition of social capital should really have been in the introduction as a little bit of background. And so you can see here, I've made some corrections, some comments all the way through. And you can see at the end here, there are just a few more corrections. I haven't made any serious comments about the discussion conclusion because I think at that stage, I thought it was actually quite good. All right, come along, computer. There we go. So this is what the rubric will look like. If you have a look at your marked assignment, you'll see this marking rubric. I put a mark in there, and then it automatically gives it a grade and colors up that column. So in this particular case, the ideas and supporting evidence weren't as good as they could have been, nor was the grammar and punctuation. And then so in this case here, you can see there's a total score. Now, some of you handed your assignments in late, and what will happen is that you'll get late penalties, and it works out to be 5% per day late. So if you're 1 day late, you get 5% off your mark. If you're 2 days late, 10% comes off. All right. Then what you'll also find is that there are some general feedback comments underneath the marking rubric. And I've made some general comments about what to do and how it can be improved. So in this case here, the student went well over the word count, so was marked down a bit for doing so. All right, so that's an example of a marked assignment. Right, so the point now is you need to take that feedback on for the next 2 essay assignments. And so that's assessment item 5 and item 6. Now, there certainly are some components in the feedback on assessment item 2 that you can also take into assessment item 4. But assessment item 4 is a little bit different to being a complete essay. It's a component of an essay. And we will talk about that shortly and in more detail in subsequent online meetings. All right, so I'm just going to pause there and ask if anyone has got any questions. No one's posted any questions in the chat, which I've got up on my second screen. No one's raising their hands. No one's unmuting their microphones. All right, so I'll just move on then. I think the one thing I do want to emphasize is that in assessment item number 2, we did allow you to use the first person. So we allowed you to use I, we, our, us. But from now on, and I will deal with it in a lot of detail in a subsequent online meeting, from now on, we've got to use third person. So that would be he, she, they. But what is even better is to use the passive voice. So I'll give you an example. This is a sentence in first person. I herded the sheep. All right. The third person is he herded the sheep or she herded the sheep. It's better to say, using passive voice, the sheep were herded by him or her. All right. So we'll talk about that in a whole lot more detail a little bit later on, and I'll give you examples. We'll practice those, and we'll work through some of those examples, and you'll be better informed for your next assignment. All right. So just very briefly, I'm just going to go to assessment item number 4. Right. So the first thing to do is to go to the subject outline. I prefer the PDF version. And so you go down to annotated bibliography. It's important to have a look at when is it due, how much is it worth, and how long should it be. All that information is there. For the annotated bibliography, you have a choice of disciplines, agricultural industries, or disciplines that you want to do the assignment on. So if you're interested in livestock, you can do the assignment on livestock. And if you're enrolled in a horticulture degree, you might want to do the horticulture topic. But that doesn't mean if you're enrolled in horticulture that you have to do the horticulture topic. If you look at the wine topic and you don't like the wine topic and you quite like the livestock topic, then you're most welcome to do your assignments on livestock. You don't have to do the assignments on the discipline of the degree that you actually enrolled in. So you choose your discipline. All right. Then what will happen is that, and I'll show this to you shortly, you'll be given four sources of information, and those will be in assessment item number 4 tab, and then you've got to produce an annotated bibliography. And I will show you very briefly, and you can go and have a look yourself. I'll just show you where to look to find all of this stuff. So here is your task, what you need to do. So you'll be given four sources. You do an annotated bibliography on those 4 sources. Then in addition to that, you have to go to the library. And remember, we did assessment item 3 was on how to use a library and how to find peer-reviewed journal articles. You then need to go to the library and find 2 peer-reviewed journal articles related to the theme or the topic that we have given you and that you have actually chosen. And then, of course, one of the most important things, and I'll talk about referencing shortly, is that it all needs to be referenced properly. All right. So there's a little bit about the rationale, and then there's your marking rubric. And then underneath, you need to submit the assignment in Microsoft Word. Do not convert it to PDF. And there are some other requirements here where it says go to assessment 4 tab. So I'm going to take you there now. So we go to assessment 4 tab. And what you'll find now is that we've extracted some of the critical components out of the subject outline and put them in here. Again, you can see what is it worth, how long should it be, when must it be handed in, how do I hand it in, and then there's the task, and there's some rationale, and there's the marking rubric, the marking criteria. All right. In this folder, then you will find what I've called general information, and basically this is explaining exactly what I'm explaining to you right now. Go to the subject outline, then go to the assessment tab, then do this, then do that, then do this. So it's a step-by-step guide as to where you should go, what you should look for, and what you should actually use. And then what we've got here is we've got a description of what is an annotated bibliography. And I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, because what I am going to do is I'm going to demonstrate to you what one actually looks like. Here's a little bit about word counts. What we've also provided you with is a couple of videos. These have come off the internet, and I see that I found these on the internet, and I put them into my subject, and I see what the library have actually done. We've actually used these same videos and put them in as resources on the library. So obviously the library also think that these are pretty good. All right. What I've done here is I've created a short video just explaining the step-by-step process of what to do. So here, for example, are some examples of annotated bibliography. So this is University of New South Wales. You can read all about it here, but this is what I want you to have a look at. So this is what a typical annotated bibliography looks like. This one is too short. Yours will need to be a whole lot longer. So an annotated bibliography is a reference which sits at the top. Right. Then you provide an introduction or a topic sentence, which is an introduction to the annotated bibliography. Then what you do is you actually summarize the information from that reference that we've given you. And as I said earlier, this is too short, okay? And 2 sentences of summary is not going to cut the mustard for the annotated bibliography for this subject, okay? You're going to have to write a whole lot more than that. But this is just to demonstrate what it looks like. You've got the reference at the top, you've got a topic sentence, and then you've got a summary. And what you need to do is when you summarize the information, you mustn't make broad overview general statements. You need to summarize the facts, the figures. So for example, horticulture students in the past were given the theme of the pollution caused by the blueberry farmers in the northern New South Wales area, where the fertilizers they were using was getting into the environments and causing pollution of waterways. Now, the critical thing there is not to say, well, the fertilizers are polluting the waterways and affecting the environment and causing this kind of damage. You need to pick out the actual details, okay? So it's fertilizers. Which fertilizers are they using? Which components of the fertilizers? Is it the nitrogen that's causing the pollution? Is it the phosphorus that's causing the pollution? Is it some other components? Okay. The research showed that they're over-fertilizing. How much are they over-fertilizing by? 18%. So we're looking at the detail. You've got to pick that detail from the references. All right. So what pollution is actually happening? Okay. So these chemical fertilizers are running into the environment. Okay. And they are getting into the waterways. They are causing algal blooms. They are affecting the lesser spotted tree frog, which is endemic to the area. And they're also causing damage to red eucalyptus trees. This is going further downstream. It's getting into the oceans, and it's causing damage to specific corals in the Great Barrier Reef. All right, so don't talk in generalizations. Don't talk in general statements, overview statements. You need to pick out those details and provide those details. All right. So then the last part of the annotated bibliography is an evaluation of the reference with respect to the theme, and I'll show you the themes shortly. So what you've got to do is you've got to evaluate whether this was useful, what limitations it had, what were the conclusions that they made, and then you make a reflective statement on explain how this illuminates your topic, or how it will fit with research or fit with the theme of the essay. And the final thing, which is not in this particular example that I'm showing you, is that you will tell me whether or not you would use this reference in an essay on the theme that we've given you, and why or why not you would or wouldn't use it. So let me just go back to another example of an annotated bibliography. This one comes from UNE. I'll just again make it a little bit bigger. Again, too short, but this just gives you kind of what it should look like. So in this case here, what we've got is we've got the reference at the top, and that's in the APA format of referencing, and we use the APA form, so this is a good example. Then there's an opening statement, and then there is some summary of what was in the article. And again, I just need to remind you, this is only 178 words. We're expecting you to write about 250 to 350 words per annotated bibliography. And then the last bit of this annotated bibliography is giving an evaluation. So if I just go back here then, is that in the annotated bibliography, the first thing that you do is you do a full bibliographic reference. So it's got to have the author, the year, the title, the source. And then below that reference, then you start off with a topic sentence, then you give a summary. All right. Now, the important thing here is that the summary has got to be about 60 to 70% of the length of the annotated bibliography. Once you've summarized, then you need to provide an evaluation, including a final reflective comment as to whether or not you would use that reference and why not. And that would make up about 30 to 40% of the assignment. Right. So that just gives you an overview of the annotated bibliography. Now, where do I find the themes and where do I find the sources? They are further down here. Right. So just as I go past, I've given some exemplars of previous years. They're not the same themes, they're not the same references, but they are there just to show you what a decent reference list and what a decent annotated bibliography would look like. Right. So here are the themes and the sources. So as I said earlier, you choose your discipline, pastures or livestock or viticulture or wine. We used to have viticulture and wine together, and we had one topic, but students fed back to us and said, well, look, they are quite different. Can we have separate topics? And the last one here, but not least, is horticulture. And you can see there are 4 sources. But the important thing here is there's a theme. Right? And so what you will do is you will summarize each of these articles. Some of them are reputable sources and some of them not. And you have to determine that. And you have to tell me whether they are reputable or not and why not as part of your evaluation. So in some cases, we'll give you blogs, which are generally not reputable sources. We'll give you chapters from books, which are reputable sources. We'll give you newspaper articles, which are written by journalists you can never trust and are therefore not reputable articles, and so on and so forth. But what you'll need to do is you click on each of those references. You can download them or you can just read them online, and then you'll have to do your summary and your evaluation. Now, be warned, this will take you a long time, at least 20 to 40 hours of work to do this assignment. It's worth 40%. So don't wait until the last weekend before it's supposed to be handed in. Start working on it now. Very important. All right. Referencing, I'm going to talk about referencing shortly, and how to find peer-reviewed journal articles. Now, the academic skills guys have actually also provided some useful information about how to evaluate information or how to find peer-reviewed journal articles. And I've also provided some links here as to how to get to find peer-reviewed journal articles. I don't see any questions coming through. All right. So let's just minimize that. No questions. All right. So what I'm going to do now is, in the last 20 odd minutes, I'm going to go very quickly. I'm just going to give you a basic introduction to referencing. Right. So the first thing is that why do we reference? Well, it's important to acknowledge the work of others, whether it's concepts or words or images. And most of you will have had to have done, well, you all have to do the academic integrity subject. If you haven't done it, you really should do it sooner than later. If you haven't done it, you'll never get your results. So that's a rule from the university. If you don't do the academic integrity subject, you won't get results at the end of the semester. So just make sure you do that. There's a little bit of a lull in this subject, so probably now's the time to get cracking with that. All right. The other thing is that it ensures academic honesty. And what I do need to point out, and I'll talk about Turnitin shortly, is that I have handed over students this last semester. I'm actually dealing with 4 or 5 students who've been handed over to the academic integrity unit for basically either not referencing or plagiarizing information from websites or from other students. So we do take it seriously, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. All right. So why do we reference? Well, basically, it's considered intellectual theft or plagiarism. All right. And we, as I said, we treat it very seriously. And so it could result in you just being told, right, do the assignment again. It could be result in you getting kicked out of the subject, could result in you getting kicked out of the university. So just be very careful that we do take it seriously. We are monitored by TEXA, which is the Tertiary Education Qualifications Association. I don't know the exact name for it. We do get monitored, and randomly they check whether we've been checking on you. So Big Brother's watching, and we're also watching you. So just be very careful. All right, so referencing basically shows honesty, openness, integrity. It shows our dependence on other people's work. It allows others to follow up for more information. And basically, it also separates the work of others from your own opinions. And I talked about where you write your own opinions in your paragraphs and in your discussion and conclusion. All right. So what should we reference? If you get facts, if you get opinions, if you quote directly from a source, you need to reference it. Even if the material has been paraphrased by someone else who's taken it from somewhere else, you still have to reference that. And then, of course, you have to reference graphs, pictures, tables, for example. Any data that you get from the Bureau of Meteorology, you need to reference that. All right. But you don't have to reference, obviously, your own opinions and interpretations or stuff that is common knowledge. All right. And you just have to use your own common sense as to work out what is common knowledge and what is not. If there's any doubt, reference it, or find a reference that backs whatever you're actually saying. All right, so let's just talk about quotations. All right, now, if you're in the law faculty, what you'll find is that there'll be massive amounts of direct quotations. So students will be required to quote this case and quote what happened here, and there'll be massive amounts of direct quotations or tracks of text that are directly quoted in assignments. In agriculture, it's frowned upon. All right. So what we do allow is we limit the amount of direct quotations to 5% of an assessment item. Right. And when you use information that you quote directly, you need to put it in double inverted commas. All right. So just make sure you don't directly quote more than 5%. Now, so that is for assessment items 5 and 6. For assessment item 4, which is the annotated bibliography, the amounts of direct quotation for the assignment is 0. You have to put everything into your own words. So don't use direct quotations in the annotated bibliography. All right. So, how do you acknowledge the work of others to avoid plagiarism? Well, you reference every idea of information or every piece of information that's not your own. You keep accurate notes of your sources and your readings. You paraphrase very carefully. And then what you can do is you can use Turnitin to check your assignment. So let's just talk about Turnitin. All right. So there's 2 ways that Turnitin is used. One is that students can use it to check their assignments before they're submitted for marking. The other way, it's used by staff to check your assignments. So what you can do is there are links in your student portal, or you can just go to this site, the URL. I've put the URL in here. You just find, or you can just do a search on the CSU platform and look for plagiarism checking. And then you can click the link, which is access Turnitin. Now, if you do that, what will actually happen is that this is the link. What it will do is it will take you to this document. Now, I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but what you'll need to do is you'll need to read this this document. Now, what you need to do is you need to enroll in one school for 2022. Now, fortunately, we are in the School of Agricultural, Environmental and Veterinary Sciences, and ours is right at the top. So all you do is you click on the link, and that will then take you to a website, and this is basically what it looks like. So you'll go through here, you'll put in your information, you'll click submit, you'll click on check my assignment. It will then ask you to upload a submission. You browse your computer to look for that submission, and then you upload and review, and it will then give you some information. And then what you will do is you will then, when you're ready, you'll submit to turn it in. And you'll see that against the assignment, there's no similarity report, but after a while, you'll get a similarity report, and it'll tell you just how much you've been plagiarizing. So this is kind of what it looks like. You'll find that there's a menu on the right-hand side, and you can filter out stuff. You can check which documents might have been plagiarized or copied directly from, and it will give you a little bit more information. But you can just, click on those icons there, and in that document is actually an explanation of what all of those actually mean. All right. So what will happen is that you'll end up with an account, and then you can resubmit, and it will. This document is actually showing you how you can actually resubmit. All right. So just a note shows that be aware that after using the service 3 times in a year, reports may take up to 24 hours to generate. So, the first time you use it, the reports will come back quite quickly. But because a lot of students use it a lot of the time, it does take quite a while for those to actually go through. So let us just go back to, no, here we go. All right. So this is what it might look like to me. And what you'll see here is that everybody's going to have a cover page, and everybody's going to have AHT and the assessment item 6 or whatever it is, and the question. And of course, we basically will just ignore that. This next document, this next slide here is actually showing just how not to do it. So you can see here in this particular case here, this student has got a 29% similarity report. That's too high. And what it's showing is that if you click on the number 29, it will then show on the right-hand side just how much has been copied from which particular document. Now, what is quite interesting about this, you can see that there's a lot of highlighted material here, which means it's been copied from somewhere. But what this is actually telling me is that you can see here that the text and the references are highlighted. What this shows me is that this particular student has copied from another student. Another student has written a good assignment, put the references in properly, and this particular student has actually gone and copied that assignment. And so when we see stuff that where the references in the brackets are highlighted as well as the text, then that's a red flag for us to go and investigate whether that student is actually copied from somewhere else. And then we can determine from the right-hand side here who has copied from, or who has been copied, or what has been copied. All right. So, all right. So no questions, nothing in the chat. I'm running a little slower than I expected. I apologize. Welcome, Citra. Just ask you to mute. Thank you. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to talk very briefly about referencing. I'm just going to talk about the basics of referencing. All right. So you'll have to learn to take notes. And if you go to the academic skills tutorials, in one of those tutorials, it actually tells you about note taking. So go there. Right. So there are 2 ways to reference. One is that you reference in the text, and the second is that you make a list of references. Right. Now, if you want to know more about referencing, what you can do is you can go to the referencing page, and you can click on this link that I've got here, and it'll take you to a document which looks like this. And this is the APA referencing summary. I'll go back to that shortly and show you how it works and what you can do with that. In fact, let's go there right now. So this is the APA referencing summary. Now, the APA referencing system is a massive system, and they've got a website and they've got huge books, publications. What our staff have done is they've picked the eyes out of it and put it into this summary document, which is why it's called the CSU APA referencing summary. So it's just some of the key points. So first part of it is just about principles of referencing in the list, principles of referencing in the within the text, and then there's a little bit about page numbers and paragraph numbers on the right-hand side. And so what it does here is it actually shows you, if you've got a book, this is how you might cite it. There's some notes underneath. That's how you cite it in the reference list. And this is how you cite it in the text. So if you've got one author, come along, computer. I don't know why it's so slow tonight. Two authors, three or more authors. If it's an entire edited book, or if it's a chapter in an edited book, if it's an entire volume, if it's in a series. So there are a whole lot of things about books. Periodicals, so this is like journal articles, magazines, for example. This is how you cite them, how you put them in the reference list, how you cite them in the text. Audiovisual media, so if it's a film or a YouTube, television, or if it's a music program, or if it's a streaming video, or if it's a podcast. Here are some examples of how to put it in the reference list or how to put it in the text. Right, so these are just, and so if you quote from CSU curriculum or course materials, this is basically how you do it. And fortunately for us, they've given us an example from my subject. So you can use that as an example if you use the materials from AHT101. If you find technical bulletins or research reports, this is how you would cite them. General websites, this is how you would cite them. Personal communication, if you talk to someone who's an expert, this is how you would cite it in a particular assignment. And then secondary sources. So when you start to work on assessment item 4, 5, and 6, you should have this document open, either printed out next to you or out on a second screen, because you're going to need to refer to it all of the time to do your referencing properly. All right, so let's just go back to being a researcher. All right, so this is the general syntax. So I've showed you the examples and the reference document, the summary. If you do an in-text citation, you can start with the reference at the beginning of the sentence, or you can put the reference at the end of the sentence, or you could even put it halfway through the sentence. If you put it at the end of the sentence, everything goes inside the brackets. If you put it in the middle or at the beginning of the sentence, the name goes outside, the date goes inside. And if you've got more than one reference, you can string them all together and you separate them by a semicolon, and you put them in chronological order. So the oldest ones first, the newest ones last. And then this is what it should look like in the reference list. You can see here it's got a hanging tab, and I'll talk about that shortly. The syntax is the author, full stop, year in brackets, full stop, the title, full stop, source, full stop. And you can see here we've got the authors, we've got the dates in brackets, we've got the title, no capital letters, unless it's the first word or proper nouns. And then in italics, this is a journal article, the source, the veterinary journal, blah, 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 blah. All right, so let's have a look at some examples on how to do this. All right, so let's look at in-text citations. So what we use is we only use the author and we use the date, okay? With one exception, if you've got a very big document that you are referencing from, such as a book, then you would probably put the page number or the paragraph or the section. All right, so when you're referencing in the text and you start the sentence with the reference and it's two authors, you use the word and. Okay, and I'll show you some examples later on. When it goes inside the brackets, then you use ampersand. You don't use the word and. Don't know why, but that's the system for APA. Right, in this case here, Jones et al., you've got more than one author. What we've got is we've got the year, and we've got a comma, comma, space, para, 76, stated that, blah, blah, blah. If it's at the end of the sentence, then you put everything inside the bracket. Right, so let's have a look at some more examples. So in this case here, if you've got Smith and Kennedy, and you put them inside the brackets, you use the ampersand. If you use them outside the brackets, you use and. Now, what you can do is if you quote several times from the same reference, you can put the authors and the date, the beginning or the middle of the sentence, and then you can put the page number at the end. You can separate them. And as I said earlier, what we will do is we will practice these a little bit later on. So let's have a look at those. Now, what I really need you to do is to pay attention to where the spaces are, where the full stops are, where the commas are, and where the brackets go. In this case here, we've got Smith and Kennedy. We're using the ampersand because it's inside the brackets. We've got a comma, a space, the year, a comma, a space, the page, abbreviated to P with a full stop, a space, the page number, close the bracket, and then a full stop at the end. And so this is really, really very important that you pay attention to all of this punctuation in your referencing. And this is extremely important. So here's another example of where we've got Smith and Kennedy, where it's now outside the bracket. So now we're using the word and, but inside the bracket, we still got the comma, the space, the full stop after P, the space, the page number, and that's basically how it actually works. Right. So here's another example where we've now separated the author and the year and the page numbers. And again, just bear in mind there's spaces, full stop, space, full stop at the end. And that asterisk is just explaining if we're using several sentences from the same author. All right, so here are some basic examples. And as I said earlier, what we will do is we will look at referencing in a whole lot more detail in subsequent online meetings. And in fact, I think we'll be referencing in 2 more of our online meetings, and we will practice these together. All I'm doing now is just giving you an overview. So what we've got here is this would be a references list. And the first one is actually a book. And what you'll see here is that we've got the authors, we've got the dates in brackets, we've got the title in italics, and which edition is it, and then we've got the publisher. So that's a book. What I've got here is I've got 2 journal articles. One is in print and one is an electronic journal article. And the way you can tell the difference is that this one has no URL or DOI URL address, and this one is a print journal. It's not electronic, so it doesn't have the URL or DOI, but it's the same format. We've got the author, the date in brackets, we've got the title. Now, the interesting thing here with the journal is that the title is not in italics, whereas the source is in italics. That's just the APA system. And I'll cover that in more detail in later online meetings. The second one is an electronic journal. So again, we've got the authors, the year, and look where all the full stops and spaces and commas go. We've got the title, and we've only got capital letters where there are proper nouns. And then we've got the journal name and its volume, the page numbers, and then we've got the DOI, which is the digital object index. And then I've got here as a website. And so this has come from the Bureau of Meteorology, which was published in 2013, the major seasonal rainfall zones of Australia. And there's a URL where we actually got it. Now, what is important to notice here is that we've got a hanging in indent. What I can't do in this particular presentation is that the references need to be actually double spaced. So we will practice this a whole lot more in later online meetings. All right, so let's just summarize this, and then I'll show you an example. Is that when you make a reference list, you start it on a new page, you put the title references at the top. It's in bold, it's not underlined, it's not in italics, only in bold, and it's got to be centered, right? So that's the APA system. References centered at the top on a new page and in bold. Then you put the reference list in alphabetical order of the senior author's name. What you mustn't do is change the order of the authors within the reference list. So if I go back here, let's just have a look here. So you can see here, this one is by Major, McGinn, and Bochanan. Don't change the order within the reference. Don't go and put Bochanan at the beginning, Major, and then McGinn. Don't change the order of the authors in the reference. And there's a very good reason for that, is that this author is the head honcho, the senior researcher, the senior member of the team who published this particular paper, right? And they like their recognition, as some academics do, and their name will remain at the beginning. What you do is you then order them in alphabetical order, and you can see these are not in alphabetical order, and I've done that deliberately just to actually to show you. All right. So, all right. So put them in alphabetical order by the senior author. Don't change the order of the authors in the reference. Do not use bullet points. Do not use a numbering system. The entries must be double spaced in the reference list, and they must have a hanging indent. So what on earth is a hanging indent? So I'm just going to demonstrate that to you now. So what I've done is I've made a reference list here. You can see I've put references in bold, centered. I've listed them. They're all listed alphabetical. Now, to make a hanging indent, what you need to do is you highlight all of the references. And then all you do is you press Control T. And what that does is that it indents the second and third lines of each of these references. So now they are more distinguishable from each other. So that is what a hanging indent is. You put all your references in, you highlight them all, and then you press Control T. Now, if you go and put an enter in here, you can see it then takes it back to the left-hand side. So within the reference, don't put any enters. Otherwise, it'll take it to the edge of the margin. All right, so that is how to do a hanging indent. All right, so use the APA referencing summary, which I've already shown you. And the last thing I want to show you is what a good reference list looks like. There we go. All right, so this is what a good reference list would look like. References in bold, centered, hanging indent, and basically following the APA system. You can see alphabetically listed all the references, and that's what a good reference list should look like. Nobody has asked any questions tonight. One other thing that you can use is the APA style blog, and I'll put a link there. And what you can use, you just go to the internet and just type in APA style blog, and it takes you to their site. So maybe what I will do here is I'll just take you there now. Allow. And this is the APA style site. And so this is if you find a reference or if something's not 100%. Okay. So style and grammar guides, references. And so if we go here, the basic principles or reference examples is the best place to go and have a look at. And so what you see here is that it lists periodicals, it lists books, it lists books and chapters. If you find a thesis, for example, so you can go and have a look here, it will then give you some exemplars of what a thesis or how to cite a thesis. And then there's some notes as to how to do that. So you can just go to the APA style blog, and if you're not quite sure, and you can get some help from there. All right. So I've shown you that example of a reference list. And as I said, we will do more about referencing in subsequent online meetings. And we will practice those together rather than you receiving a monologue from me. Any last questions? All right, so Will is a good question. So is it worth using online resources such as Cite This For Me to check the layouts and formatting of any references we create, or is this frowned upon? Frowned upon. If it's helping you to cheat, yes. If it's helping you to do things properly according to the rules, then no. If it does help you, that's good. But what we have done is that we use the APA system. We have provided you with the APA tools. Okay. Now, if you go, let me just go back to, we go back to this site here. All right, so you can see here we've got an academic referencing tool. Yeah, so I'll take you to the site and just show you. All right. So what you'll find is that, and this is on the student portal, you'll find that referencing summary there, but you can also use this particular tool. So we're going to use APA 7, and this will help you to do your citation. So this is the tool that we recommend. It's designed by the APA for the APA. What you might find is that if you go to these other sites, like Cite This For Me, number one, they might not have the APA system, but they also might not have the APA system to a T. And that's why we recommend rather use the tools that we actually provide you with. Right. Now, talking about tools for referencing, is that there are tools like EndNotes and other tools. Even within Word, there are APA tools to help with your referencing. What we find is that one with EndNotes, garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't put it in properly, it just churns out a whole lot of rubbish. And students will lose marks if they do it. So if you don't know exactly how to put stuff into EndNotes or into the Microsoft Word referencing tool, it's going to go in as rubbish. It's going to come out as garbage. So my advice is learn how to do things manually first before you start to actually use those tools. Practice, using the proper syntax, because even if you don't put the spaces, the full stops, the commas in those tools, it churns out absolute garbage. So my advice is avoid them. Learn to do it manually. Once you've learned how to do it manually, then you can start to use those tools. However, if you've studied before, or if you know how to use those tools and you're quite proficient in those tools, by all means, use those tools. No problem at all. Okay. Bear in mind that if you haven't inputted properly, it's going to come out not looking so good, and you're going to lose marks and assignments for referencing not according to the APA system. All right. So, Will, I hope that answers your question. And I don't see any more questions. I've got about 10 minutes over. All right. So I think what I'll do is I'll just stop the recording. I'll stick around for a few minutes.